Imagine a single neighborhood packed so densely that it holds the world's record for human crowding, housing over 3 million souls. Just avenues apart, gleaming estates run on electricity and servant labor, while elsewhere, 5 people cram into a suffocating, windowless box. This stark divide defined New York in 1900, merely 24 months after its 5 distinct boroughs merged into an unprecedented urban monolith. What you are about to see is an AI-generated revival, meticulously crafted from old census data, sanitary logs, and historical photographs. If bringing forgotten history back to life captures your interest, please subscribe and like this video to help resurrect more vanished worlds. The modern metropolis we know today had essentially just been born from a massive political merger. On New Year's Day of 1898, the 5 major districts united overnight, instantly forging a mega-city rivaled only by London. According to the turn-of-the-century census, the newly formed municipality boasted roughly 3.5 million residents. Of those swarming masses, an astonishing 1.5 million were crammed onto the narrow, restrictive island of Manhattan alone. Overhead, steam-powered locomotives thundered down iron tracks along key avenues, casting permanent shadows on the bustling streets below. The transition to electric power for these elevated railways was just kicking off, an upgrade that wouldn't finish until roughly 1904. Meanwhile, beneath the surface of Broadway, excavations for the inaugural underground transit system officially began in the spring of 1900. This ambitious subterranean project, spearheaded by the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, wouldn't welcome its first riders until the fall of 1904. Up above on Broadway, brilliant electric arc lamps were already illuminating the theatre district, setting the stage for its legendary future nickname. Simultaneously, the expanding city was swallowing new arrivals at an unmatched rate, right as Ellis Island unveiled its fresh, fireproof brick processing center. The newly reopened facility tirelessly handled an astounding 2,000 newcomers every single working day. These exhausted travelers poured in primarily from southern Italy, the Russian Empire, Ireland, and the vast territories of the Habsburgs. Rather than journeying far, the vast majority settled just a few blocks away from the bustling East River docks. This immediate neighborhood plunged them straight into tenement life, which was the defining reality for the city's working class. In fact, a staggering 2/3 of all New York residents called these cramped multifamily structures home. A typical building was a narrow brick rectangle soaring 5 or 6 floors high, stretching roughly 90 feet deep. Crammed onto a 25-foot wide plot intended for a single-family residence, these blocks packed in up to 24 distinct households. Once inside, families found themselves navigating a peculiar, suffocating layout universally known as the railroad flat. 3 or 4 tiny rooms connected straight through to one another, entirely lacking hallways, mimicking passenger train carriages. True daylight was a luxury reserved exclusively for the chambers facing the bustling street or the rear yard. The middle spaces were trapped in gloom, relying on whatever weak sunlight managed to filter through from neighboring rooms. Once the sun finally set, those inner chambers were illuminated only by the faint glow of a kerosene lamp or a solitary gas jet. The Tenement House Act of 1879, often referred to as the Old Law, sought to combat this stifling lack of ventilation. Mandating outside windows and restricting lot coverage birthed the dumbbell tenement, a supposedly innovative shape that dominated working-class construction for decades. Building indentations created tiny air shafts to meet legal codes, but they quickly devolved into garbage-filled chasms that acted like terrifying chimneys during fires. Despite these architectural changes, sunshine barely penetrated the inner quarters, leaving the rooms in perpetual shadow. Long before sunrise on a typical morning in 1900, tenement families were already awake and bustling. The whole apartment relied on just one kitchen faucet, which only dispensed unheated water for all their needs. Anything other than grabbing a quick drink required boiling heavy pots over the fire. Families depended on massive cast-iron ranges, fueled by buckets of coal dragged up multiple flights from the basement. During bitter winters, this hearth provided the sole source of warmth and the only meal prep station for up to 10 people. Right next to that intense heat sat a wooden icebox, keeping perishable food chilled inside its insulated walls. Throughout sweltering summers, a delivery man trudged up the steps daily to drop off frozen blocks harvested from upstate lakes. Indoor plumbing was a rare luxury, and older structures featured communal wooden outhouses tucked away in the back courtyard. Newer developments brought slightly better sanitation, placing a solitary flushing toilet out on the hallway landing for everyone to share. Dedicated bathrooms simply did not exist, so keeping clean involved filling a metal basin right in the middle of the kitchen. The entire family took turns scrubbing down, moving from the eldest to the youngest children, frequently reusing the exact same soapy water. Washing clothes was undeniably the most grueling weekly chore, requiring garments to be heavily boiled alongside harsh washing soda. Women relentlessly rubbed fabrics against ridged washboards, rinsed them under that lone, icy faucet, and painstakingly squeezed out the moisture by hand. Heavy, wet baskets were then dragged onto the roof, where clear skies transformed the neighborhood into an endless sea of fluttering garments. Beyond the rooftops, the iron fire escapes clinging to building fronts served as open-air storage for airing out mattresses and fermenting pickles in heavy crocks. These precarious balconies even functioned as playpens, where anxious parents physically tied young children to the metal railings to prevent them from plummeting downward. The relentless heartbeat of this neighborhood was dictated entirely by grueling factory shifts and the booming local garment industry. Across several crowded streets, roughly 250,000 Eastern European Jewish arrivals slaved away in tiny, cramped tailoring workshops. They spent their endless hours assembling shirts and trousers, earning a mere handful of pennies for every completed piece of clothing. Long before 7 in the morning, workers would abandon their crowded apartments, gripping metal buckets filled with their meager lunches. A typical midday ration consisted of bread paired with cheap cheese or smoked fish, while early breakfasts offered only black coffee and dry crusts. On lucky occasions, the youngest family members might receive a splash of fresh milk, provided a delivery man had made the exhausting climb upstairs. The main family feast occurred long after dark, gathered around a versatile kitchen table that earlier acted as a fabric cutting board or ironing station. In the late hours, that same table might become a bed for a paying boarder, usually a recently arrived bachelor sharing the cramped front room. Bringing in these temporary lodgers was absolutely vital for survival, helping families cover the crushing $10 to $15 monthly cost of a flat. That steep price easily devoured a third of a tailor's wages, assuming they were fortunate enough to hold a permanent position in an unstable market. Construction bosses and dock managers fired men without warning, forcing mothers to take sewing jobs home, sometimes competing directly against their own laboring children. Amidst this grinding poverty, rampant outbreaks of tuberculosis decimated the crowded tenement population, causing a horrific death toll comparable to a modern battlefield. Seeking to expose these brutal blocks, a police reporter named Jacob Rees used highly volatile flash powder, which once even ignited his clothes, to photograph the slums. Through his groundbreaking book, How the Other Half Lives, affluent New Yorkers finally witnessed the grim reality hidden inside those tenement walls. This harrowing photographic evidence eventually landed on the desk of Theodore Roosevelt, who was serving as the city's police commissioner at the time. Deeply moved by the misery, the commissioner joined the journalist to personally inspect these treacherous, poverty-stricken streets under the cover of darkness. Yet a remarkably brief ride on the elevated railway transported passengers into an entirely different universe without ever leaving the island. Up in the West Side, Greenwich Village, and affluent Brooklyn neighborhoods, comfortable middle-class families enjoyed a drastically different, privileged existence. They resided in slender, four-story brick and stone residences, built 3 windows across and packed tightly along picturesque, tree-canopied avenues. True prestige was signalled by elegant facades of rich, cocoa-tinted sandstone quarried directly from the Connecticut River Valley. This highly prized building material had proudly defined upper-crust New York respectability since the mid-19th century. Down by Washington Square, some early mansions were already aging, their soft exterior steps gradually crumbling under the harsh weather. The interior layout of these grand residences was deliberately designed around the assumption of maintaining a full-time, live-in domestic staff. A tall exterior stoop ushered distinguished visitors through a vestibule and into an expansive hallway located on the main parlor level. 2 primary reception rooms, cleverly divided by heavy sliding wooden doors, functioned as an elegant suite for formal social gatherings. The front space hosted guests, while the back remained private, though they could be seamlessly merged together for lavish evening parties. Overhead, towering ceilings featured elaborate plaster medallions supporting municipal gas chandeliers, though wealthier homes were already discreetly threading in modern electrical wiring. The second floor housed the master suite and an absolute marvel for the time: a private family bathroom featuring running hot water and a flush toilet. This luxurious washroom boasted a clawfoot porcelain tub alongside a marble-finished sink, supplying heated water straight from a copper tank. A dedicated alcove housed the toilet apparatus, while the levels above were reserved for the children's quarters and small attic spaces. Those cramped uppermost rooms sheltered the live-in help, whose grueling days began far below in the partially submerged basement kitchen. Down in the cellar, meals were cooked over a heavy coal stove and scrubbed in a deep stone sink. A mechanical dumbwaiter then hoisted the finished dishes up to the formal dining area at the rear of the parlor. This elegant dining space was perfectly arranged for the traditional Sunday afternoon feast, a true cornerstone of respectable middle-class life. Families gathered around a hearty spread featuring roasted beef or mutton, accompanied by simple boiled potatoes, vegetables, and rich gravy. Dessert meant classic fruit pies or custards, recipes popularized by cookbook authors who were actively shaping a standardized American cuisine. Keeping this entire operation running smoothly required the tireless efforts of a residential cook and a dedicated general housemaid. Frequently young Irish immigrants fresh from Ellis Island, these women collapsed at night in freezing bedrooms 4 flights up. For their exhausting labor, they earned about $20 monthly, receiving basic lodging, meals, and a single weekly afternoon off. Meanwhile, gazing over Central Park, the city's most elite families, like the Vanderbilts, were leaving traditional row houses behind entirely. They favored spectacular French Renaissance-style estates constructed from bright limestone custom designed by the most prestigious architectural firms of the era. These grand palaces boasted built-in electrical wiring, central coal heating for uniform warmth, and even internal telephone networks. Yet both these lavish mansions and the middle-class brownstones relied on a shared food network, originating in bustling pushcart markets. The bustling pushcart trade famously kicked off on Hester Street in 1886, swelling to over 25,000 street merchants by the turn of the century. These wooden barrows supplied crowded tenement households with everyday essentials, from fresh fish and herring to pickles and daily bread. Over in Klein Deutschland, situated near Tompkins Square, older German butcher shops and bakeries kept their rich culinary traditions alive. They continued to churn out classic Central European fare, offering locals a steady supply of pastries, hearty rye breads, and savory sausages. However, this established immigrant enclave was already starting its northward migration, gradually relocating to Yorkville on the Upper East Side. Further downtown, along Canal Street and the Bowery, oyster vendors signaled their locations using distinctive red muslin balloons illuminated by candlelight. For a mere 6 cents, hungry patrons could devour unlimited plates of fresh oysters harvested from the lower Hudson and Long Island Sound. Even though rising water pollution was steadily destroying the local beds, the city was still extracting roughly 1 billion oysters annually in 1900. Meanwhile, a novel dining institution emerged along the bustling commercial arteries of Lower Manhattan to serve a completely different clientele. These fast-paced chain lunch counters catered to the massive wave of white-collar banking and insurance clerks rushing out for their midday meal. Standing at a sleek marble bar, a worker could down coffee, a sandwich, and pie for 15 cents in less than 20 minutes. Unlike older European capitals, New York's glaring wealth disparities weren't separated into distant geographic rings, but existed side by side on identical avenues. A dark, windowless tenement room, crammed with 5 sleeping family members, might stand right next door to a spacious, well-appointed building. That adjacent property could house a dentist or pharmacist, enjoying 3 private rooms, a piano, and the rare luxury of an indoor toilet. Just blocks away, old 3-masted schooners still delivered coal, while a rising wave of reformers began channeling public outrage into real housing changes. Jacob Riis's shocking images had finally shifted public sentiment, inspiring a fresh wave of activists to demand immediate action. Figures like Laurence Veillet partnered with charitable organizations to draft groundbreaking regulations that would forever alter the urban landscape. This tireless advocacy culminated on April 12, 1901, with the passage of the landmark New Tenement House Act. While the legislation couldn't legally bulldoze the existing dumbbell structures, it permanently outlawed their future construction. Moving forward, every newly built complex had to feature spacious interior courtyards rather than suffocating air shafts, alongside true outward-facing windows. For the first time, builders were forced to include private flush toilets and sinks with running water inside every single unit. To guarantee these strict new building codes were actually followed, the city established a dedicated tenement house department. Over the next 10 years, modern conveniences like electricity would slowly start to replace dangerous gas fixtures even in the poorest kitchens. Mechanical refrigerators would soon render the old iceboxes obsolete, and the debut of the subway in late 1904 would completely reshape residential boundaries. Yet, sitting exactly in the year 1900, the households of New York City rested delicately on a pivotal hinge in history. The grueling 19th-century routines of hauling ice blocks, tending coal stoves, and scrubbing at wash tubs remained an inescapable daily reality. Across the island, domestic life was still heavily defined by dim air shafts, live-in maids, cramped borders, and traditional brownstone parlours. Meanwhile, the modern vision of a private nuclear family enjoying indoor plumbing and electric lighting was only just being sketched out on architectural drafting tables. The era that was about to vanish was still vibrant and awake, persistently frying breakfast over hot coal and dragging heavy water buckets up endless stairs. It was the final gasp of a congested, brilliantly inventive city, a New York on the very brink of becoming the modern metropolis we know today.